This will actually be a quick F1 update video. So we made it through what they originally called the first preseason test, and then they renamed it to the shakedown test. It was supposed to be a private test. Um, Apparently, the teams had originally decided on that, and where they're actually doing the official preseason testing, Bahrain had paid a very large sum of money for exclusive broadcasting rights. Needless to say, there was still a lot of information that came out. The big controversy is still surrounding Mercedes and Red Bull potential loophole that they figured out for compression ratios on the internal combustion side of the engines or power units, to the point where they're having more meetings about it. It not just every rule change, but every season in Formula One. That's part of the joy of Formula One is, okay, who found the loopholes? You know, um, and I say kudos to Mercedes and Red Bull, because if they actually pulled off what most are describing, that's really a hell of an engineering feat. Um, I can barely wrap my head around the material science that would be involved in what they did. So essentially the rules say for the internal combustion engine, when measured at ambient temperatures, um, essentially the volume in the cylinder, the volume of air from the bottom of the stroke to the top of the stroke can be no more than 16-to-1 compression ratio. Okay. Well, the way the rules are written, originally it just said, it was up to the manufacturers to determine this measurement, and then it said they had to be measured at ambient temperatures, essentially in the pit lane. You know. So the theory is that both Mercedes and Red Bull have come up with a way to increase that compression ratio when under load and when the engine is running hot, which I'm sure there's some fluctuation in every engine's natural compression ratio to some extent or another. You're dealing with metals and they expand when they get hot. So if your cylinder head and the cylinder walls expand, obviously you've now constricted the amount of volume in that space, which is therefore going to exponentially, it's going to increase the amount of compression that you actually have in that particular volume. You have a smaller space for the same amount of air, basically. It's going to get more compressed. You know, but to actually engineer this as a solution is brilliant as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think personally that, you know, sure, I get some of the other manufacturers, and probably the one who's got most room to scream would be Audi, who a lot of the engine regs that are in place at this particular season were kind of put into place to entice new manufacturers to come in, and they were one of them. I do believe they're one of the ones who are screaming foul than Ferrari. Um, so the interesting part is, they keep making this big stink about it, and they're having these meetings, and the teams who didn't basically see past this loophole, um, are screaming foul because supposedly it can equal out to about 15 brake horsepower under load, or upwards of 3/10 of a second. I think in reality it'll probably be less than that when you start to factor in all the aero and then of course the synthetic fuels and all this other stuff. I think the real benefit wouldn't be straight actual horsepower. I think if anything, it might benefit the recharge of the hybrid systems. Um, but that's just my theory. Um, the part that gets me is there's another rule in place right now, because up until this rule change, the engines were frozen as far as what they could do and change and all that other stuff. All they could do is reliability changes. They couldn't actually do any performance upgrades or anything. Well, now with the new rule set, basically every 6 races, there's an opportunity for competitors to introduce new and or more efficient or upgraded components to all of the power units to try to help more evenly make the playing field. Of course, at this point, if all the Mercedes power unit cars, which would be 4 different teams, and the Red Bull, which is 2 teams, have a slight advantage for the first 6 races, yeah, of course it's going to potentially skew the rest of the season. That's Formula One. You know, I don't know how they're going to fix this or change it, or I don't even know if it's going to be really that easy to even measure or detect. I will admit my own lack of experience and knowledge in this particular area, but so there was a lot of interesting thing that came out of the shakedown test. Reliability, as far as reliability goes, Mercedes is definitely top dog. They clocked in the most laps with no problems at all, which is good to see, and not surprising, honestly. Um, it looked like and Ferrari came in a very close second as far as number of laps and reliability, and that stuff is concerned. So that being said, as of right now, both the Mercedes and Ferrari powered units, the reliability is down pat. Now it's just going to be a matter of focusing on performance, and we'll see what happens there. It's so hard with the closed test to really gauge anything. Nobody knows. We don't even have a clear picture of what tire compounds people were using. It's come out that some of the teams weren't even using the new synthetic fuels. They were still using petrol-based fuels, which defeats half the purpose of checking reliability. Well, you would think that would be, considering it's part of the new rules. I for one, would definitely have been checking that. you know, um, so yeah, it's going to be. The bottom line is it's going to be a very interesting season, and that's half the joy of Formula One. Okay, who came up with what loophole? How are the teams going to squash it? How are they going to ban this innovation or that innovation, and so forth and so on? And and like I said, as far as I'm concerned, if both Red Bull and Mercedes came up with this particular loophole, more power to them for innovating. Why should they be punished because they came? Because according to the rules, when it's measured, they're legal. Past that, hey, it's anybody's game. You know, I find it ironic that Ferrari is one of the ones crying foul, considering how many times have they been basically caught cheating? Fuel flow, all kinds of stuff. But one of the things I haven't heard a lot about is a lot about the fuels and stuff, and it's a lot of things that nobody's really talking about. Um, they're going to all new synthetic and/or biofuels, but not only that, the amount of fuel has been drastically reduced. They went from 110 kilograms down to 70 kilograms. That's a drastic difference for the same race distance. Um, so yeah, but nobody's really talking about that yet. So hopefully in the next test we'll see. A couple of weeks. Um, Bottom line is, before we even got to the initial shakedown, we haven't even finished with delivery launches or anything yet. There's already massive amount of controversy out there, and it's going to be a good season. It really is, and I'm totally looking forward to it. So, yeah, I'll definitely be doing more Formula One content as the season progresses. I just don't really have the time or energy to sift through all of the fake clickbait skepticism highlights and stuff, and once they actually start broadcasting some real information and some real facts and stuff, yeah, I'll probably be doing more of that. Although I don't anticipate being necessarily a news site per se. It's more going to be race reviews and this kind of stuff. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, that's where that is.